Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of February 3rd. We open the budget process tonight, which will last us for several weeks until town meeting. There's also a rather extensive list of articles that we'll be debating, most likely after the book goes to press, because several of them deal with the planning board having to make votes. Before we get too far in, there's some new faces here. Can we just have everybody who's visiting announce their names for the record, please?
Sure, you want to start
Yeah.
with Landis and kind of go around?
Hi, Landis Hershey, Walpole Conservation Agent.
Hi, Rick Mattson, Director of Public Works.
Patrick Shield, Assistant Town Administrator.
Mike Donovan, IT Director.
Ashley Clark, Community Development.
Liz Gaffey, Town Clerk.
Tim Bailey, Fire Chief.
Lisa Sinkus, Assistant Treasurer Collector.
Jody Cuneo, Town Accountant.
Marilyn Johnson, Finance Director.
And Jim Johnson, Town Administrator.
Jim, you've got an overview for us, and then we'll...
Sure. I'd like to just run through the articles quickly. Just keep in mind that this is just a draft. The board, selectmen are going to be signing the warrant tomorrow night, so once we get a signed version, I will get you a copy. So Article 1 is the open article that usually throughout town meeting. It's to hear committee reports. Sometimes we have a couple, sometimes we don't, so it just depends. Articles 2, 3, 4 relate to the Personnel Board. The Chairman, Larry Pittman, will be coming in at one of your future meetings to review that. At this time, they're recommending a 2% living adjustment and a couple of minor modifications to the salary schedule. Article 5, this is the in-year budget adjustment article. Usually, in the past, we've addressed the veterans budget, police department budget, fire department. It just depends on if any budgets are running a little tight with that. 6 is the 2021 budget, which we're going to start that process tonight. 7, 8, and 9 relate to the sewer and water commissioners. 7 and 8 are their regular budgets. 9 is the in-year budget adjustments for the sewer commissioners. We'll get into that when they come in that evening, but at this time, they're likely going to be dipping into some of their retained earnings to help balance their budget. I don't have that number tonight as to what that's going to be. I'm actually going to hope we wait as long as possible to pick that number, because the closer we get to town meeting, the better idea of what we'll know what that exact number is going to be. Article 10 is the financial impact for the snow and ice, that deficit. Right now, we have about 400 to 420 left in that account. We've gone through roughly half of it. We started with $818,000 there. So December was bad, January was a good month, so we got March and February left. The Article 11's prior year unpaid bills, usually that's a no action, but we leave it on there in case we get any surprises. Articles 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 all relate to the town contracts. All 6 of these articles cover each of the various bargaining units on the town side. I've already started negotiations with the police, the dispatchers. I'm also meeting with the fire this week, so we're starting to gear that up. I don't know if there'll be a contract available for each of these by town meeting. If not, there'll be no action, and then we'll put it off to the fall and go from there.
Hey, Jim, real quick question. Did the school reach agreement on their contract for September 1st?
The teachers did, yeah.
Teachers did.
I believe they're about, this year it's a 1.5. And I forget what it's all around, it stays right below 2 for the teachers, I know that. Article 18 is something new. It's a DEP grant loan that the water superintendent brought to the sewer water commissioner's attention. I'm sure he'll bring that up and discuss that with you. It's a low interest or no interest loan through the DEP. 19 is the PEG cable access. That's to the yearly operating budget for Walpole Media Corp. 20 is the adoption of the stretch building code. That is a general bylaw. That's not a zoning bylaw, so that's not going to the planning board won't hold a hearing on that one. But I'm sure Phil Chikorowski came in, asked the Board of Selectmen to consider this. They are sponsoring this article. And we'll have much more to come on that. What's the impact? The night we discuss it, I'll make sure that Phil's here, but also building commissioner's here, so you can ask him some questions. Article 21 is the inclusionary zoning bylaw. that the Affordable Housing Committee has worked with the Board of Selectmen to bring forward. You may recall that this came up at the spring, and for whatever reasons, it wasn't necessarily ready for prime time yet, but I think it is now. It's been vetted by all summer, as Andrew can attest, and all winter, and we are going from there on it. The next article relates to the Housing Trust, which kind of goes along with the inclusionary bylaw. Again, you might recall that was on the last town meeting. This one is a much more detail-oriented article compared to what you had in the fall. So much more debate on that, I'm sure, to come. Ashley is coming before the Board of Selectmen briefly on, what night is it? Tomorrow night to discuss it, but the Selectmen are going to have a special work session on the 11th, which you're welcome to join, just for these two bylaws. We're going to set aside 1 or 2 hours just to discuss this, nothing really else. 23 is a citizen's petition to establish an overlay, zoning overlay district to allow parking in South Walpole. Some of the folks from the church in South Walpole came forward, started working with Jack Wiley on the Conservation Commission, and they asked us, they worked with us to help develop this, but they are sponsoring it. So more to come on that one. That will require a 2/3 vote. And the last two articles are sponsored by Richard Fila. One relates to any capital items over $5 million, and the other one relates to establishing some sort of an escrow account. I'm sure Mr. Peeler will be in here to explain this to you in the future. Just some general things before we get into the budgets. I know some of you are new to this process from this end of it. I'm always asked the same questions about what's the various account balances. So on page 15, it's just a standard thing I have now. We currently have $5.1 million in the stabilization account. The reserve funds budgeted at $210,000. Free cash was certified at 5.6. The OPEB contributions and the current balance, which is $4.8 million. So just, you can refer to that if it comes up during discussions at all over the next few months. And then, of course, the schedule, which will likely be subject to change, but here's where it stands now. So that's really it.
Question,
Yes.
just to clarify, so once the selectmen assign the warrant, then no new articles can be added? And
No, it's closed now, so no new articles can be added. So over the last 2 weeks, council and I have worked together to kind of vet the wording on the articles. That the citizens petitions, we can't touch those wording, but the ones that are sponsored by boards and various committees, they can be changed. So these are just about finalized.
But with the wording of the articles, can they be changed after the warrant is signed?
In the motion, they can be, if the moderator allows it, and if he determines it's within the scope of what was advertised as part of the warrant.
Jim, did you want to do a revenue overview tonight, or just get into the general?
Do you mind if we just get into it? Because I would have made separate copies, and the revenue, what I want to talk to you about, I want to actually show you a couple of sheets that Jody, Marilyn, and Lisa and I worked off of, which shows kind of averages at the bottom, because, so if you don't mind, we'll do it another night, and I'll be able to give you those sheets. Yeah. So, Mark, how do you want to handle it? Just kind of like we've done in the past, where we run through each item, and if you have a
Yeah,
hold,
we'll do like we do at town meeting. We'll just, if there's a hold on a particular budget, we'll put a hold on it, then we'll go back and look at the details and
Sure.
and review.
So I'll just run through. So just yell hold if you, and usually Claire would note who the hold is, but Joseph, do you mind? Thank you.
We'll do our best.
Okay, Charter Review Committee, 0 recommended. Town Moderator, 0 recommended. Bylaw Review Committee, 0 recommended. Total Selectmen, 87,638. Total Town Administration, 439,515.
Hold.
Town administrator, so this is for the selectmen or the administration?
Yelled administration.
Administration.
Brian?
Doug.
Doug, excuse me.
Okay, Finance Committee, 23,480.
Hold.
Is that Doug again?
Yep.
Reserve fund, 210,000.
Hold.
Town accountant, 219,851.
Mark?
Municipal office expenses, 69,400. Board of Assessors, 329,757.
Andrew?
Treasurer tax collector, 561,242. Is
Hold.
that Mark? Sorry. Brian. Legal services, $215,000.
Hold.
Personnel board, $2,800. Information systems, $320,888. Town clerk, $188,650. Elections and registrars,
So I have a hold on the town clerk.
Okay.
elections and registrars, $129,843. Conservation Commission, $79,022. Planning Board, $65,467. Zoning Board of Appeals, $8,500. Pond Management Committee, $1,500.
Excuse me, was there a hold on zoning board of appeals?
No.
Okay, sorry.
Pond Management, $1,500. Community and Economic Development, $147,303.
Andrew?
Permanent Building Committee, 0. Building Maintenance,
We'll do that with DPW.
yeah, okay. Town Report and Annual Audit, $64,800. Trust Fund Commission, $450,000.
$450.
$450, sorry. My bad.
All right, that's our starting point for tonight. Administration, Doug?
I was looking at the salaries,
Yes.
or the salary, and I was just curious, it looked like it was broken down with an 80-20 split.
On which one?
Your
town
salary
administrator.
specifically.
Actually, it's, we split some in the insurance line item and some in this line item.
And I guess my question was like, was it done that way last year?
Last year was 100% administration.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's the reason for splitting it up? I understand you
Quite
work on
honestly,
a
I
bunch
s-
of different things.
I
but-
spend a lot of time on the insurance budget, and I thought it was fair. I tried to keep a lot of these lines pretty level. If you look at insurance, it is level, salary-wise, on that end. So I spend a considerable amount of time on it, so.
Within these, and I guess I'm just going to ask this question now because it's part of this. You were, you had money for one of the ICMA conference or something,
Yes.
something like that. This Munis software or whatever this is, it looks pretty sophisticated. Is there a way to roll up all of these line items at the total level so we can see the total for all the administration for the town, all the trips for the town?
Like, what are you asking for specifically?
So if we go through and we add up all the in-state travel,
Yeah.
you might come up with $5,000. But
Sure.
you have to go through every single department to add up those numbers. Is there a way to roll it all up?
So you're
you can see
asking,
the
so
total?
how much do our 3 departments do?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're looking for something specific, just shoot me a note.
I'd be curious. It looks like there's, okay, I'm not looking for anything specific. I'm just
Yeah.
looking for the totals in general.
The total
I don't know
of
if that-
interstate travel?
To me, that's, for all of the items. It looks like you've got
So
20
training,
different items within the budget.
meetings and
that just repeat.
conferences, travel.
Okay.
It seems to be recurring.
Is there
in
line
every-
items,
Same line item.
expense,
Is there a way to
travel?
get the total of all of those?
Yeah.
I believe there is, yes.
I'd like to see that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions on administration?
And just to make a note, I'm not looking for you people to vote tonight on these, just, I want to run through them, but because there is things that are going to change, like the insurance budget, I am 100% sure that's going to change versus what you're discussing this evening. Same with the school budget. So I'd hold off on for now, because if things do change with the insurance, I would like to put some more money back towards the schools, but the selectmen have made it clear to me, like fire is a priority. They'd like to see all the firefighting groups be at 10 per person. Right now, the way this budget is set up, there's 3 groups of 10 and 1 group of 9. So if some money shakes out, that'd probably be the first priority, as the selectmen have identified. And then maybe a couple of others. Senior center comes to mind. So you okay with that, Mark? Just, okay.
Doug, I just have a question. If all of those figures are developed for you, what would you hope to?
I'm just curious to see what the totals are. How much does the town spend in in-state travel? How much does it spend on all the conferences? I'm just curious to see. It's nothing more than that. And I'm frankly lazy, and I don't want to add up all the numbers.
Jim, I also noticed that we have a retirement coming up within administration.
Yeah, well,
There's a succession plan in place, because I didn't see overtime or anything else jumping out as a new number.
no, that's one of the things. I know selectmen wasn't held, but I got a little creative as far as, that's one of the reasons I put a lot of, 20% of my salary in the insurance budget, because I wanted to keep these pretty level between the selectmen and administration. But with Cindy going out upon her retirement, I think I'm going to change some things around in our office, and do some things a little differently. But there is, you get your accrued vacation payout and everything. That is budgeted within the administration and selectmen. And we did something similar for the finance department too. So, finance committee was the next hold.
Yes.
Excuse me, did you release your hold?
Oh.
Yes, sorry. Release the whole.
Doug on the finance.
With the finance committee, I just wasn't sure if you could, that $7,000 in printing. I wasn't sure if most of that was the warrant. Do you know how much? I mean, I'm looking at all this paper around us, and I'm wondering how much we're wasting on.
This paper, when the code comes in, we plug in, I believe it's my code, administration, but it's all the warrant booklet.
I mean,
We talked about it years ago when Dan was the chairman, of going electronic with that. I think most of the committee supported it, but there were a couple members on the board that are no longer there that didn't support it. So maybe something you people want to talk about or bring up in the future. So.
but I think it was in the charter too, that when the charter is written, we would have to go through an act of legislation to have it amended.
Yeah, you'd have to have an article on there to change all that. So.
And then it's a case of the process of gathering communications to people saying, hey, the warrant's been posted. Do you have to do it in newspaper? Can you gather email addresses? Or do you just basically say, hey, it's been posted in the library, it's been posted on the website. It's on you to go find it now. That was some of the arguments of the people who didn't want to make the change.
Release the whole.
Thank you.
Reserve fund, reserve fund, Brian.
Just curious, Jim, if you can just let me know what the last few years it looks like we're starting to transfer to the general fund, what the reason is for that?
The last few years, just looking at what you've expended. So in 17, you expend 5,000 out of there. 18, 0. Last year, you're 33,000. This year, you have 210 budgeted. So I forget what the big transfer was for 33,000. Do you remember? I don't know. But that's just kind of what I think it was veterans, yeah. The veterans budget ran short because he's bringing on so many, but he's doing his job, he's going out and doing more benefits.
But there was one year we ended up bumping the number up to 270, and we used over 220.
Yeah.
Because we were subsidizing snow and ice, school special ed, and overtime for police and fire, and basically it just started to move.
Yeah, in 14, you were 223 spent out of there, and 15, 276. So.
Town accountant, Mark.
I'm all set with
All
that.
set? Okay. Anybody else have questions on town accountant? Okay. Board of Assessors, Andrew?
Hi, Jim. I was looking through the Board of Assessors detailed budget, and I'm wondering, were resources added, services in particular, so that a study of owner-occupied dwellings could be done? And this is based on feedback from Dennis Fliss on exploring the town of Walpole potentially adopting a residential exemption. When I came before the select board last November for the tax classification hearing, that's the feedback that Dennis told me going into that. And I think it would be really critical if the Board of Assessors had the resources to study that.
So I remember having that conversation with you. The answer is no. The budget that the assessors submitted didn't include that, and I don't know why. But I just went forward with, you can see, they're going from 326 to 329. If that's something your committee would like to add in there, we could certainly do that. Because from what I recall, we talked about doing it 2 or 3 different ways, through a capital budget, through budget process, or through I think it was end-of-year budget adjustment too. Is that the third?
That would be the most expeditious, I believe, right?
Yeah,
Because the
yeah.
Board of Assessors could start that study now in this current fiscal year.
Yeah.
We wouldn't have to wait to allot the money.
Yeah. So
And
we
I
could
think-
also do it under Article 5 then, also.
And to just loop everyone in, now that I know it's not in the budget, the two things I should say are the scale of these resources and two, the purpose. I think the scale that Dennis Fliss told me is somewhere on the order of, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, 10 to 20,000?
I was gonna say 20, yeah.
10 to 50? And the reason is, if we have a goal of targeted tax relief in this town, say for seniors, one tool in our toolbox that the state gives us is a residential exemption. But to fully study how it works, we have to know of the parcels and properties in town which are owner occupied. So the Board of Assessors knows what the tax bill is for a given residence, a given parcel, but doesn't know if the owner lives there or is renting it out. And so I would like to study the impact of it, but to get a full picture of this potential tool to provide targeted tax relief, we need to send mailers, essentially, throughout the town and say, do you live here? This is what Dennis Fliss told me, I'm just repeating. And if that's the only obstacle to studying what I think could potentially be significant tax relief, I think we should explore it.
Yeah, the only other option on that is that the annual census that goes out,
This we just got.
that we just got,
This is
but
the
the thing is,
federal.
somebody's gonna have to sit and cross-reference street addresses to assessor boards, ownership rules, and say, yeah, for the 100,000 residents, this person does live there, this person doesn't live there. It's like, there's no quick and easy matchup. But yeah, you would definitely have to earmark resources to make that work.
Maybe one way forward, Jim, you tell me what to do, but is maybe I reach back out to Dennis, or do you want to talk to Dennis? I'm just curious.
I'll talk to Dennis.
I'm sure there's a lot going on, and something I think we should have a conversation about.
So we would need, I'll talk to Dennis, but I know he's gonna wanna go back to his board and see if it's something they wanna sponsor or through one of those 3 ways.
That Mass General Law 58C3, I
I
think.
don't know.
'Cause you ran some numbers for us briefly about a year or so ago on that.
Yeah, I'd have to go dig them up, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it's still on the computer, so.
Is that something that hypothetically, if it's positive, would go for capital budget this fall, or?
I think
In a
Andrew was
hypothetical.
hoping to have it in place before the board set the tax rate come next November. So it would probably be, that's why we talked about doing it sooner than the fall, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll release the hold.
Okay. Let's see, treasurer collector, Mark?
Yeah, I was just looking at this, there's roughly about a 23% increase in the budgets from 17 to now.
Mhm.
And, the salaries themselves are there. Just in general, what are the big issues for such a large increase?
We have a retirement coming.
Maryland's retiring. And I didn't want to be in the same spot that we were in for Robin and Maggie. You might recall, they left and we had to supplement the budget. I know about this now. I want a budget for it, so we're not trying to run around and try to come up with funds in October. So it's there, and then it'll dip back down. So.
Legal services, Brian?
Jim, How does the legal services, the town council particularly work? Like, is that you go out to bid for that? Is that a town employee?
No, so the way it works, and I'll explain also why there's an increase there. The way it works is we actually have 3 attorneys. We have our tax title attorney that falls under Maryland's budget. We have labor counsel, who is Kevin Feely. He just helps us deal with a lot of the labor issues. He assists me as needed with the union contracts and dealing with some of the more sensitive stuff that we have come before me and the Board of Selectmen. And then the big chunk is Copeland and Page, and they service roughly a half to a third of the Commonwealth, cities and towns. We're very happy with them. We've been with them probably 20 years. They're very fair. I've looked at other towns' legal budgets, and it's $400,000 or $500,000. The reason I bumped it up by $15,000 is mostly due to the project in South Walpole. I didn't expect it to be submitted so early. I was hoping it would probably move on to the next fiscal year. So I bumped up that budget. In the past, we've been able to make sure that the vendors, the people who submit 40Bs, cover our legal costs. We can't do that anymore. They changed that law. So I want to make sure we're budgeted enough money for that specific project. Our legal bills run, I think, a high legal bill is about $14,000 a month. I think a lower one is like $9,000 or $10,000 a month. That's our reasoning. Reason we've been with Copeland for as long as we have. They have 20, 30, 40 lawyers in there, and they have someone who specializes in all the various areas of the law. So if I have a land use issue, we're going to have 3 or 4 land use attorneys that I can call on if I needed it right now. Same with negotiating the Walpole Media Corp contract. They have a couple people who specialize in just cable contracts and everything. So it helps to have such a large firm working with us.
So I'm just looking back from 17 on what I have in front of me, and just with the increase, it every year seems to be going up substantially. Have you looked at other firms?
No. And I don't want to. I feel very strongly about it. The legal budget's one of our most important tools, and some of that can be attributed to labor services. We've had some labor issues, as you probably have read, throughout the last couple of years, so that's important too, to keep that one, so no.
Or release the hold?
Town clerk, Mark.
Again, this was kind of in just general thought of the increase. It's about, since 2017, roughly a 22% increase. I'm just curious, why, like the assessors, the clerk's office. I'm just concerned about creep. It seems each year there's a 4 or 5% increase. And then specifically, I was interested in the professional and technical, that it's going from roughly 4,700 to roughly 14,000.
Oh. Liz, you mind if I let Liz speak to it directly? Yeah.
The reason that particular line is up high is that's that electronic voting through contract at town meeting. So it's $9,000 for that contract, and that's why that line has such a bump.
And we also upped the hours on the senior clerk. Now, you got a note in here that your town administrator adjustment is to 22 hours.
Yes.
Does the math reflect that? I didn't bother to recheck it.
It's less than what Liz had asked for. I'd have to go back to my spreadsheet, but I was pretty comfortable with that number that was in there. Liz was hoping to bring that person in at 26, 28 hours. I see the need down there just because of all the added, everything that's come through with the early voting. Liz is now taking over the record management of the attic, and that's mostly what this person, those extra hours are going to be dedicated towards the record management and making sure that we're tracking things, we're getting rid of things when we legally can, and then we're keeping track of where the other documents are.
All set? Planning board, Andrew.
Two things. One, I'm not sure that this is the appropriate department or budget line to ask it, but in your State of the Town address, you mentioned that we're gonna undertake an update of the master plan. Where's the budget for that?
That is gonna be paid for out of the Kendall Fund. The Kendall Fund has 400,000, does that sound about right? 463,000 in it. We can only use that fund. It was gifted to the town years and years ago by, I know it was the Kendall family. I don't know if it was Mr. or Mrs. Kendall. It was gifted to the town. It can only be used in assisting with the planning and of the town's future. They were very specific. We can use it on the master plan. We can use it on eventually the zoning rewrite. So it's not something we need to go and get appropriations for. We've used it for, we brought in a specialist to help us with some of the South Walpole project. We paid for her fees out of that, and it can only be used specific for specific purpose.
Great. Does it take any action by this committee or town meeting to like allocate those funds, or can you just?
You just can allocate
So
it.
the
Yeah, as
select
long
board
as the
can-
finance director's comfortable with it, and I have to explain, I wouldn't go and buy a TV out of it or something like that, yeah.
Sure. So I assume the way forward.
There's
I'm just-
guidelines in the trust document that states what you can use it for.
Gotcha. And
But-
so,
Well, the actual appropriation of the funds, is that the Board of Selectmen saying go forward with a master plan, or planning board, or
The
how
Board of
does that?
Selectmen would award the contract, and when I have them award the contract, I'd make sure that we identify as part of their main motion, funded through the Kendall. I mean, Jody wouldn't approve it if there weren't funds available for it, but I would be very specific, because I don't think that's gonna be, I think it's going to be a lot, a good chunk of change to do that, and the zoning bylaws too.
great. And so my second point on the planning board budget item is the professional and technical services. You have $2,500 for, but the request was $20,000. And as someone who's observed the planning board a lot recently, I could see why they would want to request a lot of professional and technical resources. It says under the line item, I think this is page 44, it says consultant. This is essentially the line item for the consultant. So I'm just wondering, the reason I ask is because there's so much on the plate of the planning board, so much development is happening in town. Having a consultant at this critical point seems like a good idea. I'm just wondering.
So prior to hiring Ashley, I sat down with the planning board chairman, board of selectmen chair, and the zoning board chair. We talked about, the future of the position and, a number of people that have kind of come and gone through that position, and really the stress that the planning boards, it's a complicated process, and it's a complicated board to work with. I asked the chairman, would you mind if I just have this new person focus on economic development, the zoning issues? I didn't know we'd be getting as many 40Bs, but 40B type of issues. And all three chairmen were agreeable to it. They thought it was a good idea. And I said, what we'll do is we'll go forward. We'll get a consultant. We'll solicit proposals from, I think we got 3 or 4 consultants, and we'll get you some prices on that. And I suggested, why don't we fund it through your fees? If your fees are pretty low, we can make the applicants pay for it. Everyone seemed to agree on it. We've gone forward, gotten 3 quotes, and at this time, no action's been taken on those at all. The fees haven't been changed. So that's one of the reasons I look at that and I'm like, they spent 0 out of there. They could put that on the applicants and make them pay for it instead of the town and the taxpayers paying for us to have the consultant on board. So it's more of an action that I need, that if they want to do something with it, they really need to take action on those proposals we provided to them.
Great, thank you. I release mode.
Community and economic development, that might be related.
Yes, so I had a hold on this line item to ask pretty much the same question. First, I want to give a shout out. Ashley has been fantastic working with the Housing Partnership and various other boards. I know the Zoning Board of Appeals is inundated with a lot of 40Bs right now. And I know the ZBA has their own budget line item, but because Ashley, which I assume her salary and her resources are in this
Yes.
community, yeah, because she is assisting them with the wave of 40Bs, just wanted to, check in on where the, consulting resources. I know Courtney has helped Ashley Courtney Starling is a housing
Yep.
consultant that I've seen the town work with. Just if they have enough resources, given the amount of 40Bs, the amount of work that's going
I'll
on.
let Ashley answer. Anyway.
I don't know exactly what your question is asking, but under the 40B, we're allowed to hire peer reviewers to do a lot of the technical review, so that'll be a whole separate thing. So like for the Summer Street project, we're gonna have design peer review, we're gonna have stormwater, all, engineering and so on, and we'll get checks to pay those guys separately. Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm
about,
asking,
or-
to be blunt, do you have enough resources in this budget to meet the workload that I've seen you have to take on with 40Bs?
So since this is my first budgeting year and it's really a new, different position, I kind of just based off of what was spent last year. So next year when I come back, I might have a better sense of what we need. There are some increases in here. My goal is to increase the level of customer service that we're able to provide. So maybe next year I'll have a better idea for you, but right now I think this will work.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mark,
Yes, Ally.
you said a wave of 40Bs, so I have like a two-part.
Okay.
Can you just kind of give us a quick rundown of the wave of 40Bs? And I'm kind of echoing Andrew that I'm concerned that we don't have enough in the budget for the consultants. And there's obviously a lot of talk in town about the 40Bs and what's coming on board. And what I'm hearing is people like, is the town hiring lawyers? Do we have consultants? Is there enough done? And right now, looking at these budget line items, have they been given enough to really say, yes, we're kind of going after this strong?
So as far as the waiver of 40Bs, here's what we have for 40Bs right now. Burns Ave was recently approved by the zoning board of appeals. We received, what was that, Friday, we got the notice
We
that?
got an appeal.
Yeah, we get the appeal notice. So that's been appealed. That's 32 units. Then we received, we weren't expecting it so quickly, the South Walpole 300-unit project proposed by Omni, which is 240 apartments and 60 townhouse condo style units. And then we have Dupy Street, which is 12 units. That's being proposed, 12, right? Yeah.
We've not received an application. for the
They've
town.
received approval from Mass Housing. We haven't just received the application from developer Wall Street. And then the other one is Moose Hill Road. What's the name of that one? Do you know?
Moose Hill.
Moose Hill, okay. That's 8 units on 52,000 square feet. It's just over an acre of land.
I don't know the lot
Yeah.
size off the top of my head.
What side of Route 1 on that one?
That's right where the 158 unit project went in behind Walmart. It's directly in front of it. So, so those are the 4 that we know of. We've heard rumors about Gilmore's, and I've asked around. I actually went and spoke to the owners of Gilmore's 2 weeks ago. I popped in. It is for sale. Ashley's talked to the realtor. They supposedly have a few offers, but nothing set in stone. And from what we've heard, it's mostly housing talk, and kind of made it clear that the downtown, we're concerned with the influx of apartments in the downtown right now. And adding more to that is gonna, obviously probably create some problems for us. I'm concerned about it.
Daily.
Yeah.
And also,
So-
if I could add, I applied for a grant through MHP that gives us, I think, $10,000 to have a technical 40B consultant. So we got grant money through the state basically for that, which will be a big help.
And I can dip into the Kendall Fund. That's one of the ways we funded Courtney, who Andrew referenced. She's helped us out with some of the stuff, Ashley's able to bounce some things off of her.
She was funded out of the Kindle Fund?
Yes.
She was fantastic.
I'm just concerned. I'm hearing a lot of the kind of talk, and I think people in town need to know that, like, as we're going through this budgeting process, obviously the issue of 40Bs is on a lot of residents' minds, and that we're going after it with everything we can.
And as far as the legal budget, I sat down with the chairman last week and I talked to him about the legal. I said, bottom line, I said, don't worry about the cost. You people probably don't want to hear that, but if there's a problem, I'm going to come forward and ask for a reserve fund transfer. Right now, that budget's looking fine. We have a legal team specifically for that project in South Walpole because it is so big. So I'm not concerned about the legal. We've got some good people working with us. Ashley's comfortable with the team that's been assigned. So am I. They've worked with the zoning board before. So.
And did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious. We're talking a lot about responding to the incoming 40B applications and that process, but are we doing, is anyone doing forward-looking planning on behalf of the town if we don't have a full-time planner?
As far as like the percentage or what specifically?
I don't know, like, looking at the parcels that are available and trying to understand, like, can we be working with developers to get more favorable projects? Like, are we looking forward at all, or are we just kind of like fielding things that are coming into us?
If I might jump in here, I think we are doing a lot of work, we being the Housing Partnership in conjunction with the Select Board. And Jim and Courtney, and especially Ashley, here at Town Hall, really staffing those boards. The Select Board, I think, has sponsored 2 articles that we'll talk about that were largely drafted in concert with the Housing Partnership. And we went before the Economic Development Commission, we went before the Planning Board multiple times. So inclusionary zoning and the Housing Trust, I think, is maybe the best forward-looking tools we have to consider, if it passes, to prevent 40B waves like this from happening again.
Like, let me ask another way, like, what are the services we're not getting by not having that consultant position filled for the planning board?
You'd have to ask the planning board.
Okay.
What I asked him and what we developed, and when I sat down with the chairman, I said, so what do you want that person to do? And he said, I want to have a checklist, basically. So, Megan, you come in, you get a housing project, 30 units or something that's being proposed. Everything, you've done everything the way that it should be submitted prior to the planning board even considering it. Because a lot of the times, from what I understand from talking to Jack and to Sarah, they get before the boards, and Sarah's picking up little typos or something like that, and the as-bilt's not properly submitted or something. So that was the purpose of that consultant, basically, to cover everything. And we found 3 firms that were willing to do it at, I thought, a pretty reasonable rate, but they just haven't done anything with and I've asked them 2 times, where are you at with these? Just a reminder, here's where they are. I have the price proposals, here's where they are. And they haven't done anything with it, so.
Okay, so this wouldn't really be a forward-looking person, this would be someone who's running a process and.
Yeah, and it would be a
dotting
firm,
the
it
i's
wouldn't be
and
an
crossing the
employee,
t's.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I guess just to back up Megan's point, I mean, I know social media can be dangerous, but every day you get on social media and you hear people saying, what is the town's plan? Where are we going? Why are we getting all this housing downtown? And so it would be nice to have an answer that said, I know that the housing stuff is a piece of it, but even, like what services are all those people going to need, and how are we going to provide those? So I think that's what you were getting at, Megan. Maybe not from the social media perspective, but I feel like people are asking questions, and I don't necessarily feel like I have the answers. I don't know that anybody in this room has all the answers, but do you see my...
Sure.
Is there a question in there, Jim?
I think so. So when all of this project in South Walpole came up, we had a lot of people come to me and say, how did the Liberty Village project and the other project next to the train station get approved? So we established a position paper. Here, here's the background. Here's how many units are in that. Here's when it was advertised, when it went out. Here's why it wasn't a 40B. They went for X, Y, and Z variants, and they went for a site plan with the planning board. So I have that position paper that explains why, because people automatically say, well, the town just let these projects come in and they didn't make them affordable. They weren't required to be affordable. They were able to do those 2 big projects and Walpole Woodworkers because it's allowed within our current existing zoning bylaws. And as far as the services that those people are going to need when they, 600-800 people come into town, the center of town all at the same time, that's kind of what I'm trying to address through through the police and the fire side of things, is just, I'm putting 3 new police officers in that budget. It's going to bring them up to 47, and getting all of his groups to at least 10, to try to kind of ramp up and plan for it. So we don't just next year at this time say, we only have 40 officers. And as far as like other things like trash services, that's one thing that these projects are going to have to pay for their own trash services. So that's a bonus. But on the school side of things, Woodworkers is going to be at 55 and over. Liberty Village doesn't have any 3 bedrooms; it's all 1 and 2s. And the West Street parcel, that only has about 10 3-bedroom units. So, as far as the impact on the schools, I'm not as concerned about it because it's going to be I think, minimal because there's not enough space to accommodate families. Yeah, you can have, you have that one bedroom, but you're not gonna have four or five bedrooms there. So. I don't know if that answered your question, but I kind of.
I didn't even give you a question, Jim, so you didn't know that I gave you. Just to complete my thought, I'm also thinking, like, where are they gonna do their grocery shopping if they come here and we're saying you don't need a car? We're not saying it, but you don't need a car because you're here in the downtown area. Where do they grocery shop? Where do they get their,
Their pharmacy, the whole 9 yards of it.
Yeah.
I have that concern. I think some of these parcels over here on East Street would make an ideal Brothers or some type of smaller, they're not big enough to have like a Roach Brothers or something, but some type of a small market. So you can walk to it. And I've talked to a couple of the parcel owners about, would you consider that? And their attorneys. And so I've tried to put that out there.
We are courting that sort of thing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Actually, Lisa first.
Yes, through you to the general public. I don't have a question either, but I do completely agree with Kathleen that there's a general cloud of people saying, what's going on, what's going on? I found it very useful just now when Ally said, quick, define the wave of 40Bs, and I was jotting it down, because you hear it over and over, and it all starts to blur, and to just make a quick note, yeah, this one, this many units, it's familiar, but it does help to see it presented, and it also helped your position paper, Jim, that you mentioned, helped, and I agree that obviously the housing authority, which is gonna pass, is hugely important for managing this boom in housing, but it's not only the housing, it's the schools, it's the fire, it's the police, it's the shopping. And we don't have a mayor who can stand up and say, this is what's happening to our little town. It's becoming maybe a little plus town or even a small, medium town. We don't really have anybody diffusing this cloud of questions. And it would be great if somebody could give a presentation called A Changing Walpole, and it might be the select board, and can we stop calling it Board of Selectmen? I think that's time, right?
So here's where we stand. I'm in that, I did in the budget message, I called it select board, it's just a habit for me. Technically, that hasn't gone through, that change hasn't gone through. So I've started to call it select board, but technically it hasn't gone through until the legislature acts on it, but
It's a work in progress.
the select board is, yeah.
We can all take our steps forward, but I think a big step would be for our town, just as sort of a public service. Not that we have to do it, but it would really ease the tension a bit if someone could say, here are the projects, here are the little subheadings: schools, police, fire, water. A lot of people are concerned, how are we gonna have enough water to?
I think it would be really beneficial for all of you if I gave you a copy of the position, the paper that we answered all of these, and as part of my budget message, I've made a habit out of doing it each year. I went on for 3 or 4 pages this year, just listing out all the projects, so that's in there too. So I try to get it out there as much as possible, but I will give you that.
But the town.
Yeah.
But does the town see that?
I guess it's one of those things, we really don't have a newspaper that covers the town anymore.
Right.
And a lot of people do take to Facebook. I get sucked in sometimes reading through all the comments and replies. I try not to, but once you get going, it's hard to stop. So I think we put it out on the website. Joanne Mulligan runs the Save South Walpole website, so I try to communicate directly with her and say, Joanne, would you like to post this out on Facebook, which she did at the time, and I try to do that with a couple of the other people who run some of the sites. I've done it with Andrew before. So I try to get it. It's just hard because we don't have a newspaper anymore, really. And that's where everybody went to get information.
If there were an opportunity to communicate your position paper to the town, not to, people who are already serving the committees, how would you do it? What would be the best way? What can you imagine would be the right way to help with all this Facebook chatter?
I think people read Facebook the most, and I'm going to go home tonight, and I know my wife's going to be lying in bed reading it. I think it's probably through social media. I try, when we close town hall, I reach out to Mike and ask him to put something on Twitter very quickly, and same thing to Brendan. I have him post on Blackburn, their Facebook page, and try to get it out as much as possible. Same with John Carmichael on the police. So I think social media, that's how everybody does it now. I don't have a better answer. besides that.
Website too.
And it's all, everything's on the website, but it's,
In a
you
lot
know,
of little places.
after a
right?
couple clicks,
With
people
branding.
lose interest and then just say, I can't find it. And I always say, well, did you just type it in the search engine instead of going, it's an under town administrator page. If you go on there, I did on Saturday night to look something up. I typed in town report 2018 and it came up right away, right in the search engine. So,
Susan and Kathleen again.
Just a couple of things. First of all, this really shows the value of having a newspaper, and the problems when you don't
Oh,
have
the
one,
press.
because there's really not a good organ. But I think referring people to the website is a good idea, because there are many people who don't use social media, and so they're sort of, that's not gonna be an answer for them. I think on the 40B, in response to Megan was saying, I think the goal of our housing group is to try to get to 10%. So then we are not sitting ducks, and so I think that's the immediate answer for that. One thing I'm concerned about is I keep hearing over and over again that because people are going to be moving into these apartments in town, they're not going to be driving cars. Yeah, they are. This is America. Everybody's got a car. So we're not Manhattan, where people actually get around by public transportation. So I think that there are going to be a lot of traffic headaches. And I think a lot of people think, well, people will live in their apartment and they'll take the train to work. Yeah, some will. But I think that's going to be a huge problem. But to a certain degree, we're almost going to have to wait and see what we're dealing with. I mean, you can't know what specifically the problems will be until they begin to happen. And then I think it's going to be a matter of, jumping on it and doing the best that we can. And we are in a position of reacting. But the truth of the matter is, I think when it comes to property rights, if people own a parcel of land, they're entitled to sell it. And if people have a plan that fits within our zoning, they can build it. And so no amount of stamping your feet is going to prevent that. I mean, witness the situation in North Walpole with that daycare center. You may not like it, you may not want it, but short of rezoning the town with an eye toward preventing further development, I think we're going to have to just deal with it. But I like the having a housing plan where we're trying to get ahead of the 40Bs, because I think a lot of people still don't understand, because I went to that meeting in Boyden a while ago. They think if you complain loud enough, the 40B project will have to go away. And I think we do a disservice to people by not clearing that up right out of the gate. Yes, we can try to work at the edges, but you can't just make them go away. Until you hit 10%, you're going to have to cope and deal and do the best you can to keep it as manageable as you can. At the end of the day, that's state legislation that driving that.
Two quick things. I think that the key point you said is, we are not the property owners. The town of Walpole is not selling off property to
Right.
developers, and I think that's something that people miss out on, unfortunately. They're
don't
wondering
understand.
why we're not holding this property for a flower shop or something
Right,
instead.
right.
But the other thing is, you are doing a state of the town.
That was the budget message last week.
Is this, no, I went to,
State of the
I went to
town
that,
address
but
through
something at New Pond Village.
The Chamber of Commerce is sponsoring something. They do it every year, and I haven't committed to it because it's actually on the same night as your meeting. And I told Harry, the Chamber President, they're meeting that night. I have a finance committee meeting, and they went ahead and booked it. So he said, "Well, we'll put you on first." And I haven't talked to him.
It's like from 5 to 7, though, isn't it?
Yeah. So.
So I just wondered if that's a vehicle, but if it's Chamber of Commerce, it really should be clear that it's not town sponsored.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's advertised as the Chamber of Commerce. I've seen it on Facebook this weekend, but in the past, it's always been the Chamber of Commerce.
But is the type of thing Lisa's talking about what you would do there, or you're?
I kind of give an abbreviated version of the budget message.
Excuse
Yes,
me.
go ahead.
He had, Harry did the Chamber of Commerce State of the Town at the center last year.
Yeah.
but what he did was a very little overview. He had he had 3 real estate people come in, and one in particular I took exception to, because he basically told the audience that if you're over 70, you should sell your house, and we were part of the problem, and we should downsize. Yes, at the senior center, yeah. I thought that was really
Know
classy.
your audience, yeah.
Yeah, know your audience, yeah.
He's
So
drumming up
it-
business.
Yeah, well, he didn't really, in my opinion, he didn't really go into the depthness of even an overview of what Jim gives. It's very much on the commercial end of it, how we gonna benefit the real estate.
So a forum for his
markets.
members.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's a networking session.
Yeah, you were, as was Susan and such, but I think it's a little disingenuous to call it the state of the town
I agree.
message, because I don't think he really,
Speaks for the town.
Right.
among other things. Just leave it at that.
Anyway.
Just one other comment, what I find interesting, with 2 parts. So, one, if you talk to anyone, you know, from a state government standpoint, Massachusetts, we have a housing crisis.
That's what I was gonna say.
And if they could build the housing on the tracks, they would build the housing. I mean, that's just kind of the mindset. The other thing that I find interesting is just, now they're clashing. So downtown, we have these, you know, a couple hundred apartments going up, and I take the train every morning, and I can't imagine what it's gonna be like to move into one of those apartments, especially the one up on top by the train, when the craft line, and I know it's supposed to be Foxborough, but we noticed,
We know.
comes through. I don't know, if you haven't done it yet, just check the schedule and go there when one of those trains is coming through. Because the gates drop, things start clanging, and then the train, it does its whistle at least 5 times. And I can't imagine at 4:30 in the morning, when the first one comes through, till midnight. I think that's gonna be affordable housing, because who's gonna pay to live in something?
Patrick and I walked through there right around Thanksgiving, and they made it very clear to us that wasn't part of their plan when they built that. They didn't know that was coming through. And he said the apartments that are right next to the train tracks are gonna be a lot less costly than the other apartments on the other side. Because we were there. That side of the building shook.
You can
So-
literally, from the back door, like, hold out the lunch, and someone can pick the lunch. The train
Charlie
is
on the
at-
MTA.
And then the new one, the 40B that's going down by itself, it's the same thing. Now the train is going down the track, it's clanging because down by Summer Street, is it?
Yep.
Where it drops?
Yeah.
You know, and that's where he's planning to put the other, and I'm just kind of thinking to myself, going,
He's gonna have difficulty getting people out of the complex because the train's coming by. And everybody wants to make the left-hand turn to get out to Route 1.
I can't imagine the noise. I agree with you. I live on South Street, and at 4:30, at 5 o'clock, in that half hour, you can hear a minimum of 8 whistles,
Yeah.
like they're right in front of our street, because it's so quiet out, the way it echoes through. I agree with you. I can't imagine.
yeah.
And I can
Living
hear
right
it, I
there.
can hear it at Route 1 in the summertime, not in the wintertime, because the sound doesn't travel as much, but in the
Yeah.
summertime at 4:30, I can hear a train coming by,
Good
clear
luck to
clear
them.
as day. So,
You released your hold, Andrew.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thanks for holding that in.
Good discussion, though. That was needed, definitely.
So I think that's the last hold in general government, is that
Yes.
correct?
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask one question on the elections?
sure.
I just noticed the part-time, and maybe it's because there's a federal election,
There's 4
Yes.
it goes from
elections.
21 to 44.
Yeah,
Okay, so what is it? I'm
it
sorry.
is because it's the spike in
On
the
the
budget.
elections, the
Yeah.
part-time salaries go from 21,000 to 44,000.
So those would be all my election workers, so I have 4 of them this year. 4 different elections that I need to employ.
So it's based on the number of elections?
It is, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, that number will go down next year, I won't be out.
Now, is the federal government requiring early voting for the presidential primary this coming March?
Yes, so it's the last 5 days, the last week of February, so it'll be the 24th to the 28th is early voting.
Okay.
It's only 5 days, and then in October, which is the fiscal year you're looking at,
Right.
I have 10 days, and a Saturday will be strongly recommended, so I usually open up on a Saturday as well. So that'll be 11 days of early voting.
But the statewide primary in September for the state races is just the one-day event.
That's right. It's just the federal elections that they
Okay.
require.
All righty. Got an update to the debt budget coming around?
So, what I'm passing around is the debt budget that I gave out last night. Sorry, I passed them around. Was more or less a draft. Marilyn updated it today to make sure we include the hypothetical scenarios, because I'm asked about that a lot. As far as the high school, if we end up doing something, what can we do within the debt budget? So that's why the items highlighted below in yellow, I just called them hypothetical scenarios under my notes. So where do we stand with everything? As far as the Fields project, we haven't borrowed on that yet. We're going out to borrow in May. So Marilyn's floating that with, like we have with the other projects, cash that she has on hand. And then when we go out to borrow in May, she'll reimburse those accounts that we're borrowing, we're kind of using it off of, right? So, overall, the debt budget's set to see about a $75,000 increase, and that's kind of consistent with what we've been doing for the last 6 years or so. With now that the town buildings are done, I'm focused on doing something as far as the high school. There's a need there. That's why we did the $400,000, which is out to bid. When are those due back in, Pat?
February 13th.
February 13th, so.
The feasibility study.
The feasibility study, that was the $400,000. So eventually, you'll see at the bottom where a lot of money becomes available in '25, and then by the time we hit 2027, we're showing just about $2.3 million available to place towards potential high school project. But again, that's going to be up to you folks to work with the school committee to figure out what direction we're going to go in. The MSBA, which we were in at today, made it very clear to myself and to Bridget and to Link before that they're not funding a high school project for the town of Walpole. So we're going to have to do it on our own. So, which MSBA, we were in there today. We picked a project manager. We went with Compass Project Management. Patrick and Mike Fisher did a great job putting all that together. And so they were good with our decision to go with Compass. Compass helped us out with the COA, police station, and fire station. They did an excellent job. I was really pleased that they were picked. So.
You got Brian again.
Yeah, we got Brian again. And Susan's serving as the representative on the building committee. It's about a 15-member board. And so far, they've had about 2 meetings, just because there hasn't been that much to do. Now that we have an OPM on board, we're going to get the contract awarded, and the next step is getting an architect on board. The Compass laid out their timeline as far as the school project, and they're thinking, what did he say, next October or something like that?
Yeah, for project and scope budget.
Yeah, project and scope budget, so I think that's a little aggressive, I don't, but they've done it many more times than we've done it, so we might be back here in the fall talking, was it fall 20 or fall 21?
21.
21, so we got about, so that's not as bad, so we got about a year and a half to work everything out, and then we'll have to go to the ballot from the polls. So.
Are they still talking one middle school, one combined middle?
What is on the table right now is Byrd Middle School, and they'll consider an option to, if the town wants to consolidate the 2 middle schools. They will not, Johnson Middle School is not included at all, so.
What entity makes that recommendation to the MSBA? Is it the school building committee?
It's gonna be the building committee, but MSBA also has to go along with it. They have to be comfortable with it, and we have to make it clear to them that we've explored all of our options. We have to show them that we've explored everything, all sites and everything, but for the most part, I can tell you, the focus has been up at, off of East Street there, between East and Washington at the Byrd Middle School. As far as what can we do with that site, it's kind of tight, but it's not something, you can do it because we've actually toured the Natick Middle School, and it's a very similar site. Literally, the old middle school and new middle school are about 10 or 15 feet away from each other, and just gonna knock down the old middle school afterwards. So it can be done on a tight site.
Is there a timeline for when that decision will be made? recommendation and the
I think
approval?
once we get the architect on board within the next 4 or 5 months, and that's, so I would say between 12, 18 months, that decision will get made.
The paperwork.
So this is just an overview of the debt budget, and I know you guys always ask about where we at with everything, so that's more or less why I have this here. As you can see, we're budgeting 4.5%, all the way up to 5%, just to show you what it'll look like. I think it's gonna be about $30 million. That's what, I've asked Brian and Tim Bonifati, what do you guys think? And he said, you know, Brian's children went there, and he knows the school pretty well. He said he's probably talking about probably $30 million renovation or addition onto that school.
So if a scenario of just rebuilding Bird is on the table, do we also need to be allocating for Johnson renovation or expansion?
Again, this money
Yeah.
that I have written, that's gonna be up to you guys in the school committee to tell me. I've identified it, how do you wanna spend it?
Yeah, so there's
So
not-
we'll know at the end of the process if the Johnson Middle School kids are going to join the Bird Middle School kids over at one combined school, and if not, we are going to have to address the Johnson Middle School.
So this
So
line item is really money left over for
It's-
school building improvements?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Placeholder, yeah.
Yeah.
Other questions? Okay. Ready?
Okay.
Benefits?
The benefits line, right now, and again, not looking for a vote tonight, I gave you folks a copy of this sheet here that just shows what our cost breakout is. And right now, I'm budgeting about an 8% increase for health insurance. Patrick and I attended the Mass Municipal annual meeting last weekend, and that's where they announced the rates. So they gave us a range of negative 1.5 all the way up to 8.7 for all the towns that participate in Maya. I've asked, when are you going to have Walpole's numbers, because it's a pretty big range. They're hoping to have it within the next couple of weeks. They told me you're likely going to be in the middle somewhere. So the average was like 3.7, but the midpoint was 4.15. So I did the math real quickly using the 4.15, and I got it freed up about $400,000 or so for us. And that gets the school to the 4% that I'm sure the superintendent will come in and talk to you about. And what does, we've sat down a couple of different times, and I know I'm kind of all over the place, but the health insurance is going to impact the schools one way or another. So the schools are going to tell you, Jim's at 3.3. To get to really level services, we need 4, but the school committee would like 4.8 to do some other programs. So I've talked to Bridget, and I said, make sure that you give the finance committee some scenarios. What does 3.3 really mean to you? I'm going to eliminate X, Y, and Z position to get them funded. Where does the 4% get you? I know it includes 2 or 3 new positions and a little bit of money towards full-day kindergarten. Not a lot. I think only literally $15,000 is what I saw. So it all depends on the health insurance budget. And the other big budget that's going to be impacted is the tech budget, which is about a $200,000 increase, which they told me budget for a 24% increase. I don't think it's going to be 24%, but he was being pretty conservative. So those are the 2 budgets that are going to impact the school budget, really. But as far as the health insurance, this is the sheet I work off of to come up with the number. So it's all here. Obviously, we have multiple different categories. We have the 80/20s, who that transition started in January 2003. So anyone hired after January 2003, you're 70/30. And then we transitioned about 3 or 4 years ago to anyone hired after, I think it was 2016 maybe, we started it. And we had to phase it in because all the union contracts were up at different times. So anyone hired after those dates, you're 60/40, and then our retirees over 65, you're 50/50. So that's really the breakdown there. Any questions?
Mark?
Yes, Adam.
So at your meeting last week, you mentioned a new split does that include this discrepancy between school requests and what the budget is? You said 68.
Oh, yeah, I thought you meant
Split,
insurance
yeah.
split, yes. So the budget that you guys have here is like a 68.07 to a 31.91 or something like that. So I deviated a little bit from the 66-34 split, yes, to get them closer, because without that, we were really only at a 3%
So we're still,
increase.
so there's still a pretty significant gap in between the two then.
Yeah, it's about, I think 1% for them equals $461,000. So I think the gap is about 323,000 just to get the superintendent to the 4% that her and I have talked about.
Thing is, in Jim's formulas to get to that split with the schools, all these employee benefits in this section here, they come off the top and then we split.
Yes.
So even though the population might be, 60-40 between school and here, all this cost comes off the top first, and then we split the difference. So any savings he comes up with in health benefits, they're gonna grab 68% of it, and we're gonna get 32% of that savings on our side for the
It's more,
municipal.
again, always thinking of like, what are you hearing, what's
Yeah.
talk, and a deviation from the 66-34 is like, okay, but, oh, that's significant.
Mhm.
When you're running the numbers and what you see the needs are, it's like I don't agree with it, but for some, it's a very significant change.
And I know the superintendent will get into this, but one of the biggest things that they didn't really see coming is the reduction in the Medicare benefits on the school side. I touched upon that briefly in the budget message, but that's going to cost them. Last year, they got $592,000 back for Medicaid receipts and parking. Parking makes up roughly 30,000 of that. So last year, they got about, rough numbers, $560 back for Medicaid. They're only figuring they're going to get about, I think she said about $250,000. So that's a big cut. And
Is that a new formula that?
the way it was explained to me is the federal government's tightening their belt and looking at any way to make reductions. And if town of Walpole, well, this bill for Jim Johnson's kid is not reimbursable, so we're not going to reimburse you for that through Medicaid. So that's, she can explain it better than I can, but they're just tightening everything up. So that's a big, $560,000 is a big amount of money that comes through our free cash. It gets turned back over to them in the fall, and that's one of the reasons why they're looking at 4%. Because I went back and I looked and I'm like, okay, what's the average been the last 5 years? What has the school budget gone up? It's about 3.06% over the last 5 years. Last year was 4.34%, but that was, we made changes to our health insurance, so we actually saw a dip by negative 0.79 in our health insurance. So that freed up a lot of money by on the backs of the employees. We don't have that this year, obviously, because we absorbed it a bit last year, but we're trying to get them close to the 4% as possible.
Jim, on the retirement plan, the $5.4 million, that's kind of a big jump since 2019's budget. Is that still just an estimate, or do you have a hard number? Very good estimate.
Is that Norfolk County? Are we talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a firm number.
The 5.4?
Yeah.
All right.
We have, and you've probably heard it, we have a lot of high school students parking in the parking space across from the police department. Started out at 4, and we're up to about 14 cars that are there now from the high school. It's not private property, it's public. How do you, is that a resource that the kids are avoiding, obviously paying the fee, but how do you, number one, stop it? Can you stop it? Or if they're gonna be there, how do you make sure they're paying the parking fee that every other student has to
They're not paying the parking fee at all right now.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
No, because it's gone from 4, and it was 14 today, that there was 14
I would say it's students
high
that
school
weren't able
kids.
to get spots in the beginning of the year that got their licenses later on in the school year, or
As soon as the
their
parking
juniors.
lot got paved, they showed up. And
So-
we're now up to 14 kids.
It's kind of the similar situation as what we have downtown. We get people have complained about commuters parking over in this back parking lot, and we've talked to some of the business owners, and there's not been much of an appetite to change the town of Walpole parking regulations or do meters or anything, because people got all up in arms and, well, I can't tell my employees not to park there. Some of the employees like to park close to the building, and it's really, they didn't really want to regulate it. And as soon as we brought it up, they said, no, don't. So it's one of those, we probably have to update our parking regulations, and some people aren't going to be in favor of that, so.
Well, I know I ended up parking over there myself today, and where the vans are parked right now, shortly with the weather getting warmer, you're gonna be having the kids playing hockey,
Yeah.
street hockey and stuff in that area, which means the vans are gonna be moving over. And the kids, there was 7 cars there parked.
So we can handle it nicely, and the chief and I have talked about it briefly, and he said, if you want me to start doing enforcement over there and talking to the kids, tell them they can't do it, I will. I've gone to Kerry and said, is it an issue yet? No, she said, no, it's not an issue yet, but I'll let you know when I need you to
It's
get
getting
involved,
to
but
that
it sounds
point
like.
because of the volume of people that are coming
Yeah.
in.
Okay,
And especially where the good weather is coming, and they set up their nets and stuff there for the street hockey, which is very, very popular. And the basketball, they have a good time there,
yeah.
which is great.
Jim, any progress on reevaluating the downtown parking as to layout and number of spaces?
We talked about that, 6 months ago? What I'd like to have us do is probably reappropriate. I was waiting for the police and fire stations to be completely closed out, which they are. I was waiting for the fall to probably reappropriate that money. And police has about 300 or so left in it. Sound about right? Yeah. 292. And fire has just around 100, maybe a little bit less, but 100-ish. So we could my plan is to come forward to you folks in the fall, work with Rick and Drew and Carl in engineering, come up with a plan as to how can we better lay out that space and reappropriate that money for that. So that's the plan.
Okay. Any other questions on employee benefits and assessments?
So more to come on this budget, much more.
Yeah.
So if you don't mind, so next, on Thursday, we have Culture and Recreation, Health and Human Services, and the big one, Public Safety. I'm assuming Health and Recreation and Human Services I'll make sure the department heads are present, but I'm guessing you're gonna wanna get into Public Safety, and so they'll also be there.
Yeah, we don't want to hold the other people up. Chief doesn't mind, does he?
He loves coming to your meetings.
All right. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, thank you.
Just as Jim just mentioned, this Thursday's agenda has been set. Is school still likely to come in next Monday?
Oh, yes,
You're all
she's
set?
confirmed.
Can we get paperwork ahead of time so we can prep?
Yep.
for a change.
Bridget and I spoke today at the MSBA, and they just finished the budget books. I think you had asked for something, and they're gonna send them out. They were gonna make sure we can send them out electronically, so we can get everything.
And then a week from Thursday is Public Works, where we'll pick up the building maintenance budget, which was the one we skipped tonight, and
Parks
pick up all
budget
the other-
too, yeah.
Parks Department too, yeah. And we are off for February vacation like the schools, and we'll be back on the 24th with sewer and water, and local media corp, and getting into the actual articles of town meeting. Yes.
Question, with regards to the apartments downtown and the woodworkers, what are the tentative move-in dates for those of occupancy?
So woodworkers, I don't know off the top of my head. We just toured Liberty Village, which is the one where Finnegan's used to be. They're looking at late spring, May, June. They're gonna start to rent things, and West Street they told us March. They were thinking about doing it in phases. I know the fire chief and the building commissioner aren't really in favor of that. They're gonna occupy the front end of the building first, and then phase 2 is gonna be the whole back end, but there's some concern about, fire safety, obviously, and so I don't know if they're gonna do the phased-in approach, but they're saying late spring, so.
So basically, by the summertime, the downtown will be filled, if all the apartments.
If they
Essentially.
rent right away, I mean, there's a big difference in the rental amounts they're asking. When we walked Liberty Village, which is where Finnegan's used to be, they are at, I think he said about 300 or 400 for a 2-bedroom, and then like 1,900 for a 1-bedroom. And they're nice units, they're big, sizable units. But the other one, their 3 bedrooms are $3,000. Their 2s are in the mid 2s, like 25, 26, and the ones are $2,100. He was telling me. So.
I saw the amenities though, it's quite the list.
Oh,
I was
it's
gonna ask, does Liberty Village have a pool too? Because
They
I
don't.
saw the West Street
It was
one.
in their plans, and he showed me he said it'd probably be about the size of this table. He said it was too small, and we would have needed
It's on the 4th floor of the high school.
Literally, it was facing a wall near the parking garage, and they phased it out, so. But the other one it looks like a resort. When you look down on it, it's kind of, it's nice looking. It's not too open for me. You know, you can look up and see, Jim getting ready or something like that.
Do they both have parking underneath?
They both have parking underneath, yeah.
That's the only saving, I think, for downtown.
Yeah. So West Street has rights to about half of the parking lot that's across the street, near the riverway there. And then Liberty Village has parking underneath, but they also have parking in the courtyard there because it's shaped like a U. So,
How many parking spots are the units getting?
I feel like it's like 1.3 or 1.6 per unit or something like that. Liberty Village is a nice area built out for there. It's going to have a nice little view of a restaurant. They're trying to get some restaurants in there, 1 or 2 over on that side. And last time we talked to Corcoran, they haven't found a tenant yet. So.
Do they have businesses underneath?
Yeah.
or-
Oh yeah. So Liberty Village they could have 1 big restaurant, and then 2 small vendors, or they said they could cut up the restaurant and have 2 restaurants and then two more small vendors. It's a pretty big space. No. Lots of building. That's for sure.
We do have meeting minutes for October 17th. I don't know if people have had a chance to look them over.
Sorry.
Mark, I recall we captured Judy Conroy coming in, but there was also a young woman that came in and spoke to the gender-neutral bill. She's just not mentioned at all in the minutes.
Oh, okay. Right, the high school student.
She's mentioned later.
Okay. By name?
Yes.
Okay.
First initial last.
Yeah.
Last page.
Got it, thank you.
Okay.
Could I make a change to that, actually?
Sure.
It would be middle school student,
Not high school.
High school.
not high school, and it would be initial I, Santiago Taylor.
I think her name is just Taylor.
I think you're right. Isabel Taylor.
Her mother is Kay Santiago Taylor. I think her name's
But it
just,
says high school student K Santiago Taylor.
yeah, that's
She's
her
saying get
mother.
rid of Santiago also.
Right. Yeah, there was no high school student.
Yeah, I see.
that
So I
spoke.
down here.
Yeah, it was a middle school student, and I think you're correct. It's I, Taylor, is her name.
So Taylor or I Taylor?
The initial is I,
Okay.
and then we can delete Santiago and keep the I.
It's middle school. Any other comments or edits?
To accept the minutes?
Motion by Brian,
Second?
by Mark. Comments? All in favor of accepting the minutes as edited, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained? 14-0-0. Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a comment or-
Well, I just want to pass these out, is that okay?
Yeah, Andrew's got some handouts to pick up before you leave, so.
So I know the, just real quick before we adjourn, the Articles 20 and 21, I think, the inclusionary zoning and housing trust articles are really long. There's like 12 pages of text for those two articles. We're not voting on them until April 9th, I believe, is what Jim scheduled. So we have 2 months to digest it, but here are 2 one-pagers, one for each of those articles, this was written by the housing consultant I mentioned, Courtney Starling, in conjunction with me and Ashley. So this just helps maybe as a preview to reading all that text. Again, I know it's 2 months from now, but I wanted to do it from the get-go.
Okay.
Great.
I'll pass that out.
Encourage you to come to the selectmen's meeting if you're interested in these ones. It's a work session, it's gonna be in here. I'm sure Jim will take some questions too.
That's February 11th?
February 11th.
And that's gonna be at what time, Jim?
I believe 6:30
He's not running out of paper.
It's here.
I'll
in this room.
Thank you.
I'm bad
To this room.
Yep. Second page.
Full color.
No, let's put this on. Yeah,
So moved.
Motion to adjourn by Susan, seconded by Kathleen. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained, 14-0-0. Thank you.